Welcome back, everyone, to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 30, and I'm the co-host, Kyle Anslone. I'm joined by the other co-host, Will Porter. Will, how you doing today?
Kyle, how you doing, man? We made it 30 episodes. Did it.
That's right, the big 3-0. It's a pretty substantial number. I felt like I accomplished something when I hit 30, so 30 episodes is a pretty good start here.
There we
If
go.
you haven't yet, and I don't know how you possibly listen to 30 episodes that you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, definitely do that. Conflicts of Interest is on YouTube. Just search it up there. It should pop right up. Got the big peace dove as the yellow peace dove is our logo. And Will, anything else to plug before we get into it today? Check out the Patreon page, Conflicts of Interest. He's at the Will Porter on Twitter, and I'm at Kyle Anslone _.
Yeah,
Um,
man. I think you hit all of it. I think you got all our plugs in there.
All right, Will,
Let's do it.
we are at the end of the week here. Then this is the week of the presidential election for people who aren't listening. So that was Tuesday. It is now Friday, and we still are not sure who the next president will be. And I'll pull up the electoral map right here for the people watching on YouTube. And Will, I'll just go ahead and let you start where you want to start on the election coverage here. I mean, by the whatever the AP official count, it is Biden uh, up. I guess you could say 264 to 214, both shy of the 270 needed to win. Will, what's it looking like here?
Yeah, I mean, so compared to last time we talked, things have changed quite a bit. Biden has pulled forward. He's really close to the threshold that he needs of 270. Right now, I believe, as things stand, Trump would need to win like most of the undecided states, with the exception of Alaska. And people can see those on like the map; they're like lighter shaded. So that would mean he has to take Nevada, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina to get to the 270 delegates that he needs. Whereas Biden at this point would have to win any one of those other states to hit the threshold. And as people can see, Nevada currently has Biden in the lead. And I think that's by like 12,000 votes with 84% of the ballots counted. So it's pretty close, but that state could end up being the key one that gives Biden the win. Either that or the one that ends up ruining it, and like if it ends up flipping at the last minute because no one's called it yet, and it's a fairly close race there. Another thing that I'd seen, it's possible there will be a recount in Wisconsin, which was called for Biden on Wednesday. The Trump campaign came out and said that they had requested a recount. The race there was also pretty close. I think the spread was only like 20,000 votes in Biden's favor, which is not, when it's a whole state, that's not too many votes. I'm not too confident that this would flip at this point, a recount. Historically, recounts haven't really led to big changes in the results of races like this. Sometimes it's like a few hundred, but nothing like the 20,000 it would need to flip in order to actually change the outcome. But I don't know, with all this mail-in stuff, like who knows? There may very well be something that surprises us. Another thing in terms of like possible wild cards, Trump's also been trying to take things to court in a few of these states since election night, like in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Georgia, mostly related to like the mail-in ballot stuff, various aspects of that. Whether it's like making sure they stop taking in new ones after election day, or to limit how long they can count them for after November 3rd. Or I think in Michigan, they were trying to just make them stop counting the ballots altogether, which I didn't really see. I don't know. I didn't really see that being likely. And indeed, it doesn't look like this stuff is really going to help Trump much. I think in Michigan and Georgia, I think they already threw out the lawsuits. In Pennsylvania, it's a very important state. It's worth 20 electoral votes. It could make a difference there if Trump can bring it to court and make them stop counting the mail-ins like after a certain period of time. That may end up costing Biden some votes that he would need in that state, where it's currently pretty close there too. In a lot of the undecided states, it's fairly close. Even in like Georgia, which is kind of weird. You'd usually think that'd be a deeply red state. But I think it's a fairly close neck and neck thing there as well. So right now, overall, it is a pretty ridiculously close race. Like it could still go either way. It does seem like that whole red mirage idea that people were talking about may have had something to it, where people were predicting that Trump would have this big lead at first, and then the mail-ins would, as those were counted, it would close the gap. And so, like the last time we talked on Wednesday morning, Trump was in a lot better of a position than he is right now. There were a few undecided states where he was in the lead, and those have since flipped to Biden because of all the mail-in stuff they tallied. So that's a basic recap of like where things stand right now, I think. And I've also been going like the AP tally is the one that I've been mostly paying attention to. I think they're all pretty much the same now, but like sometimes there's little, fluctuations and differences. But I've been mostly watching the Associated Press one.
So one state that got called fairly early, and I mean within like a couple hours of the polls closing, was Arizona. At least, and this
Yeah,
isn't even on all sites. I noticed that at least as of yesterday on NBC, they actually had him penciled in Arizona for sure for Biden. And so I was
interesting.
just wondering if you had seen any updates on that. I mean, the vote total there is fairly close. It's not, I guess, completely absurd. There's some rumor that there's some problems with some ballots in a Trump heavy district, and so I guess it wouldn't be impossible for that to get changed or swing or something like that. So at least the Trump campaign keeps saying to keep an eye on Arizona. And look, it may just be kind of that their effort to make their base feel like there's still a path to victory. I know, they're both parties are looking for a massive amount of donations for, the legal funds and legal battles to come here. And so it could just be like a party profiteering thing. They're grifting hard right now, and they
Yeah,
gotta
right.
they gotta make the money while they can. And so yeah, I suppose it could be that. I don't want to just parrot what the Trump campaign is saying, because I think it's well within like what they need to happen to create a little bit of good propaganda for themselves as things go here. Another thing, election related. Will, I'm not sure if yesterday, I guess evening, you caught Trump's little press conference speech where he seemed to read off a sheet. I'm pretty sure he was reading the whole time. He might have gone off script a little bit. But in there, he claimed that he has this new saying that if you count the legal votes, I'm going to win. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that phrase, because I see Mike Pence tweeted out too now, which is if only the legal votes are counted, that Trump is gonna win. And do you think there's any credibility to that, or if we'll have to wait and see, or what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some weird stuff. Like, I mean, that is obviously too like the approach that the Trump campaign is taking right now. That like there are illegal ballots out there that they're counting, and if they wouldn't count those, then he'd win. And like you can see how that that's obviously that narrative would serve him. That like this is not a fair race. I have not actually seen anything like definitive that would say that there's any like shenanigans going on. I did see some weird stuff in Michigan where it appeared that like suddenly Biden got like a ton of votes. Like they tallied all these mail-in votes and it was 100% Joe Biden, not even a single one for Trump. But I had seen some other people trying to explain that, saying, "Oh, it was a typo," and they reversed it, and it's kind of a confusing. I haven't really done the work to look into that and read about that discrepancy. So it's certainly possible though. Like like Dave Smith was saying on his show that like I don't trust any of these results. Like I don't think this is just like beyond question that just because it's the United States and we have like a tried and true election system. Like I think it's very possible that there could be fraud or just simple incompetence where they missed a batch of ballots or whatever. And so I'm leaving it open that certain things could happen in the courts or that like they will find certain irregularities or whatever, like we're Bolivia or something, like the OAS will come and issue a statement. But yeah, I haven't seen anything definitive in terms of like fraud or shenanigans with illegal votes or anything or illegal ballots. With Arizona, like that is something I've been hearing too. That like a lot of Trump supporters are saying they called that way too early because there's this one the most populous county of the state, Maricopa County. Apparently, it's like they haven't they haven't finished counting the votes there, and apparently it's very close. And that like this could potentially flip back to being to being a Trump state. So that could be a plot twist in all this. If Arizona were to flip back, that would totally ruin Biden's path to victory. I mean, like he could still, I think, maybe possibly pull something out if you got like Nevada and Pennsylvania, but that would really like take him away. Right now, he's on the cusp of victory. He needs one more state, and if he lost Arizona, that would screw that all up. So that could shake things up if Arizona were to flip like that.
Right. So yeah, I guess, Will, I just want to kind of cycle back and go over this a little bit more, because I find it very interesting, and that are the Trump claims that there's some kind of irregularities in the election to I guess outright conspiracy type fraud, that the Democratic Party was in some way attempting to rigged the election by changing the number of votes. I mean, hasn't made any very specific claims, just general ones. And at times, these regularities seem like things that are fair to call into question, like 100,000 votes all showing up for Joe Biden in the middle of the night. Although, as you
Yeah.
said, I think there's actually a pretty decent explanation for that, and there's some pretty good journalism done by a couple of Twitter sleuths, like going through and finding where the totals were wrong during the day and how they got corrected and why those votes showed up how they did. And so, I think that's the kind of journalism you need to actually make everybody feel like the election is good and legitimate. You need to allow the questions to come up, the allegations to come up of, where there might be things wrong with the election, and then to do investigation and figure out which way it goes. But rather, what I've seen, at least so far, is that anytime anybody, at all is questioning the election, they're immediately censored. Ed McMuffin, and that's not his actual name, the former CIA guy who ran for Utah and president in 2016 to try to ruin Trump. It's Ed Mick something. He was tweeting that we need to make a list. He says to shame of everybody who committed thought crimes against the election by questioning the possible integrity of it. Right. So I think this is really going to fuel anybody who feels like there's a conspiracy against the president, and and so I think this is actually undermining the integrity of the election to treat the claims of potential voter fraud like this, especially a state like Georgia or Wisconsin, where apparently the voter turnout in Wisconsin was like close to 90% of registered voters, and Georgia had a 20% increase in voter turnout over the past election. I
Mm.
mean, not to say that these things are impossible or are, a definite indicator of fraud, but for somebody to raise the question and to look into it, I don't think is harmful, and I think actually secures the election even more. But it's just, because the mainstream media is so poor at their job and immediately goes to censorship and smearing over actual investigative, journalism and reporting, I think, is going to contribute to, potential feelings from the Trump side if Biden goes on to win that the election was somehow illegitimate. And so I think that's unfortunate. And I don't know if you have anything on that, Will.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing just to see like the purging of, like you said, thought crime on like social media, like how rapidly that happens. You can't even just like suggest or even ask the question, it seems like, before you get hit with like a fact check or a label or whatever on your tweet or post. It's just, that is kind of unprecedented. Like, people have, I think, in the past questioned, certain election outcomes in the US, and it was not treated like, oh, you're not allowed to say that. But now suddenly, and obviously it's because Trump and their, a lot of like people controlling the big tech platforms, Twitter and Facebook and stuff, they obviously lean very anti-Trump, and so I think that obviously plays into it, that they're like extremely sensitive to anything that could possibly like reduce confidence in the election. But I mean, it is ridiculous though. Meanwhile, the Democrats have been screaming their head off for 4 years about how easily the Russians just like completely flipped our election. Like, it's funny, like years ago, Obama, I think, laughed at that idea, said like, no, they could never, affect our elections like that. Like, our system is too robust. But now, like, they spent the last 4 years screaming about that. But if a conservative, or someone who's even like one of us, we're not conservatives, but we're just not like on the left, I guess. If we raise any questions like that, we're immediately purged and sent to the memory hole.
Right. Well, I feel like from, our position, it's not even really raising the questions about any kind of shenanigans going on in the election, but just not saying that every allegation by the Trump people is inherently false. Like, that's really
Right.
the only point I'm making, is that, like, hey, look into it. And look, as you said, most of the time on recounts or when they look back into the election, it's only a couple hundred votes that will end up changing. And most of the time, at least, they never prove the kind of fraud that the Republicans allege. And so, if that's the case, investigate it and show it, and it'll prove to people that Joe Biden did actually get more votes in the election, whatever, however that certifies him to rule the rest of us. That's how it goes. But I don't know. The censorship has been quite disturbing, and then the kind of blanket media response to all of it, to just simply mock it after they spent 4 years pushing a completely fake story that Russia changed the results of our election. And speaking of RussiaGate, Will, we have another RussiaGate story here. Unless you have any other election stuff.
No, I think we pretty much hit on all that.
All right. Well, hopefully, I guess, Will, by Sunday's show, we could have a little bit more conclusive answer for everybody on who is the next president. But I could see this
Maybe.
really. Yeah, I mean, my guess is that Joe Biden will claim victory sometime this weekend. I really think that that's his strategy and plan here, is that as soon as the media gives him Nevada, he's going to claim victory. But it could be another month or two, or not a month or two, but week or two, I would suppose, before all the legal battles in the courts are done, and potential recounts in any of these states that are well within the margin needed to get a recount. I mean, some of these is 100,000 or 1,000, 10,000 votes in a couple of these states, so that's not surprising to me. But let's move on and talk about the latest article here from Gareth Porter. This is reprinted at antiwar.com with permission from The Gray Zone and Gareth Porter. And it is titled How DHS and FBI officials spun a dubious Russian election threat days before voting. Will, tell us about the threat they made up this time.
Yeah, what a shock. We've never heard this before. That, election Russian threat hyped up, right before election day. Yeah, so the DHS jointly with other federal agencies put out this alert, warning about like Russian election meddling and hacking attempts and all this stuff. And I had heard of this. I think they put it out last month. I didn't even think it really warranted a mention because claims like this have been so common, and without fail, they wind up being baseless and like complete fabrications. And that appears to be the case with this most recent one. Although now that we have more of like a conclusive debunking, it is, I think, worth mentioning just to show how these things, how this happens. So the DHS put out this what they call an alert in late October, saying that a Russian state-sponsored advanced persistent threat actor, or APT, they call them. That's like what they refer to. That's like their generic word for hacking groups. But this, what they call APT, Berserk Bear is the thing that the name they gave it. Like Fancy Bear, Cozy Bear, the hackers that supposedly hacked the DNC in 2016. They gave them the similar name. So they said this Berserk Bear group had carried out this far-reaching hacking campaign on like U.S. government institutions, and they said that election data might even be at risk in future attacks. They said like, based on what we saw with this one, we think that maybe that like election data is vulnerable. They did come out and say that no government operations were affected in the hacks, but on the election stuff, they took this very like dire and alarming tone. However, as our good friend, Gareth Porter, a great journalist, found, the DHS and the FBI put out this other alert earlier in October that appears to almost completely undercut the later one, the one that's like, making all these warnings about the election in Russia. So the first alert does appear to be talking about exactly the same cyber attacks that's mentioned in the later one. It refers to the same government networks. It refers to the same particular vulnerabilities that were supposedly exploited by these hackers. Except in the first document, they say nothing about Russian actors or hackers. They just refer generically to an APT, an advanced persistent threat group. And then they also said that they don't believe that any of the targets were selected because of their proximity to like election related data. And so any tie to the election that they try to make in the second document is pretty much like debunked and erased. They debunked their own conspiracy theory basically in this earlier document. So what they do end up saying is like we have some kind of hackers hitting a few government networks, as hackers do regularly, and the attacks had no effect on operations. Like that's the story we have here. That's the fairly mundane story that they told the first time, but then just a few weeks later they started dressing it up with all this Russia crap and played up all this election stuff. So yet they had no extra evidence or intelligence or any reasons to give us for why they know these things. They just asserted it, that like suddenly Russia is behind these attacks and that it could affect the election. So that was basically the gist of Garrett's piece. He has actually debunked similar claims like this in the past. Like in 2016, there were also allegations, again from the DHS, that Russian hackers had hit all this election infrastructure in all these different states. It became this huge sensational story that really played into the Russiagate scandal that was like getting started at the time. But as Gareth showed, like they never proved they were Russian like state-sponsored hackers. It was just in some cases they traced some of the attacks back to servers located in Russia, which is nowhere near what you'd need to prove a state-sponsored Kremlin operation. And then they also claimed that the Russians were meant to steal voting registration data, but the DHS never had any plausible reason like for why they would want to do that or what they could do with that data. They ended up arguing that this was all to undermine public confidence in electoral processes. I guess ignoring the fact that they were the ones in the first place to publicize this and turn it into a national news story. They were the ones undermining confidence in the election, and doing so without any evidence whatsoever to blame anything on the Kremlin at all. And so it's kind of like I was just saying about the previous thing we were talking about, that like the Democrats have been running around with their hair on fire, like talking about Russians, and how is that not undermining our electoral system or whatever based on their own standards? And so it seems like the DHS does the same thing, where they're warning of all these dire threats without any evidence whatsoever. It seems like that itself is really doing the undermining of confidence or whatever.
Right. I think that's a fantastic point, Will, that especially in the months leading up to the election, it was like every week or two, it was Iran, Russia, China, Iran, Russia, China, Iran,
Yeah.
Russia, China. And each one of, each time it was, they're doing this little thing to try to influence the election. And oh, this week it's the Chinese and the Iranians trying to win the election for Biden. And this week it's the Iranians and the Russians trying to win the election for Trump. And none of it
Making
makes
memes.
any
Yeah.
sense. And there's no evidence of any of it. You would think that, for all the like now skepticism of Trump's claims around any kind of election shenanigans, and the demand that without proof that this is obviously fake, it must be censored and suppressed and marked on Twitter and everything. That we've just had all these weeks of unfounded allegations of election interference from foreign countries, and there's just never any questions. It's mindlessly reported by the media as true. It's just like, oh yeah, this is what's happening, so be aware, people, the Russians are trying to trick you into voting for Donald Trump again. And they just get away with it. And I don't know, I would find this to be probably have a impact on the election, constantly hearing for people who still believe what the CIA and FBI and DHS say. This probably has an impact on how they feel about Trump, or how they feel about voting, or who they want to be president, if they think one of the two is either supported by or a puppet of a foreign power. So but they just got away with it time and time again, and I'm sure when we come back around to another election, they'll still be screaming about Russian or Chinese or Iranian election interference.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one thing one point I make to that, just something for people to keep in mind, and this is something Gareth has covered in his previous work, like debunking these DHS phony alerts and stuff. But like hackers regularly on a daily basis, like just private run-of-the-mill hackers, like people usually with a financial motive, they're just like cyber criminals. They routinely probe and scan like government databases and networks and stuff. So on any given day, you can reach in there and scoop out a handful of attempted probes or hacks or whatever. And it seems like that is what the DHS does. They just kind of reach in there and then they just say, this could possibly be Russia, that we found some tangential link to a Russian server or something. So like it is very easy for them to craft these kind of stories. And this is how like nonsense like Russia gets started. And like forever going forward, people will say, but the intelligence community says that it happened, referring to things like these stupid DHS alerts. But it's just like purely an appeal to authority. Just they said so. And like, you would think that wouldn't work on a lot of people. You'd think that people would just not buy that, but it seems to stick. It really does for at least a good chunk of the electorate or the population or whatever. Seems to be compelling for them.
Yeah, well, it's a slam dunk. So what can you say?
That's right.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick second here to thank the show sponsor, Paloma Verde. Everybody go to Paloma Verde store, PALOMAVERDESTORE.com, and there you could get the great CBD products. I really enjoy the soft gels. I've been taking one every morning for about the past month now, and I gotta say that it's been really helpful for like my minor back pain and stuff like that. I know that life for a lot of people is very stressful right now, not getting enough sleep, staying up, watching the election results come in. And you know, I think we have more of it. And even if we get through this election, I don't think the mainstream media and the, you know, political establishment is done playing up existential fears and really trying to get us constantly paranoid and feeling like we need them to protect us and save us from our fears. And so you know, to combat all that, you know, all that terrible fear that they try to program into you, you try some of the CBD to take the edge off a little bit, feel a little bit more relaxed, get a little bit better sleep. You're more willing to combat their anxiety provoking stories that they throw out in the news every day and try to deal with what's going on. So, all right, you know, pain, just trying to relax. CBD could help you. So check out palomaverdestore.com. Use the promo code PEACE for 25% off at checkout. Will, let's get back to the show.
All right, man.
All right, so the next couple stories we have here, Will, are about Israel and the destruction of Palestinian homes. This is something that we've talked about in the past on the show a little bit, but let's get into a little bit more today because it seems that 2019 is a year for Israel to destroy Palestinian homes, and we have like kind of like this in the macro sense where they've destroyed like I think 70 structures pretty recently, made a whole bunch of people homeless, but then they also just destroyed like an entire Bedouin village, and we could get into that after. But what's been Israel's role with destroying Palestinian homes this year?
Yeah, yeah. So, like you said, we have a couple of different stories here. I think I'll start with the more zoomed in one. Like right here on right on election day here in the U.S., the Israelis carried out like the largest series of home demolitions they've done in I think a decade. Yeah, but for people watching the screen, I believe this is the story we're referring to here. It was like 76 different structures in a village in the occupied West Bank. They basically razed the entire village. And this includes homes, obviously, these 76 structures, but it's also other things like animal shelters and latrines and solar panels, even, I think the United Nations said. And that's where all these numbers and figures are coming from, is the UN. And yeah, like you said, we're talking about a very tiny Bedouin like herding village in the Jordan Valley called Hamsa al-Bakaya. It's like 15 or 10 miles east of Nablus. It's like the biggest city nearby, but it's in a very like rural and like, sparsely populated area. But they destroyed shelters for like 3/4 of this community's population, and they forcibly displaced 73 people. More than half of them children. I think 41 of the displaced people were children. So this is the largest single demolition they've done in over a decade, based on the number of structures that they took down, 76. But it's also apparently like the biggest forced displacement at any one time they've done in the last 4 years. And again, that's all according to the UN. Like usually I think they'll just do like only a few homes in one sitting when they do these demolitions, not like scores and scores of them like they did here. So but it's not as if they haven't been doing a lot of demolitions over the last 10 years. It's just usually they do them more spread out. It's like fewer at a time. And so like when it sounds like, oh, 76, that doesn't sound like that big of a number. It's like, no, they do a lot more than that, but just, fewer in each sitting. And I think the typical reason the Israelis give to destroy these homes is that the Palestinians had no building permit for the structure. Some ridiculous, frivolous crap. Especially when you're talking about like poor villages that have been around for like centuries. Like probably not too likely they're going to be up to like, everything's going to be up to code in terms of the Israelis like modern, legal code. So I just find that kind of outrageous, imposing those kind of standards on these like old ancient Bedouin villages. But nonetheless, that is what they're doing.
And
Um,
can I just add in there, Will, because this is something that Ramsey Baroud really covers well, and it's a big issue for him. Isn't even that the Palestinians like don't have the money or can't like build a structure that's sound, but rather the Israelis just refuse to give building permits to Palestinians. It's something like 99% of building permits issued go to Israelis. There was a guy who had built like an entire apartment building that was going to house dozens or scores of people, and the Israelis destroyed it because they claimed he didn't have a building permit. And so, even if a structure is sound, the Israelis just refuse to allow the Palestinians to build. It's come to the point, and this is I'll put a link in the show notes page of this. There's a Ramsey Baroud article about how Palestinians have started living in caves because they can't
yeah.
get building permits to live anywhere else.
Yeah, that's right. I saw that. That's a horrific story. And like to even add insult to injury to all this, the Israeli we've discussed the Israeli settlements in the West Bank on the show before. They've been, I think they've really seen a surge in those over 2020. I think there's like 12,000 of those proposed. But sometimes with the settlements, and mind you, these are Israeli and like often Jewish only settlements. These are not for the Palestinians. But a lot of the time, the Israeli authorities will retroactively approve settlements that were built without permission to begin with. But yet, if it's a Palestinian structure that's not got approval, they just send a bulldozer to tear the thing down. And even if the people are inside, there've been a lot of cases where they'll just raise the damn building with people still inside their home because they don't want to give up their only piece of property they own in life, their entire livelihood. And so there's real double standards in terms of like the Israeli settlements that they'll give them a retroactive permit for it, whereas the Palestinian ones they won't hand them out at all, even if like you're saying the building's perfectly sound. So that's another sort of like I said, adds insult to injury. However, back to the demolitions, they're actually like if in a broader sense, they're actually at a high point right now compared to like the last 4 years. There's this Israeli humanitarian organization, Bet Salem. They recently put out these numbers showing that like in the first 9 months of 2020 alone, so January to September, nearly 750 Palestinians were made homeless thanks to the demolitions. That's the highest it's been since like 2016, I think. 2016 saw like it was kind of an outlier. It saw like over, I think like 1,500 Palestinians displaced, but nonetheless, still 750 this year is quite a few. And actually, there've actually been more since the Bet Salem numbers. I think the UN put out a figure saying that the total for 2020 is actually 869 people that have been, forcibly relocated or displaced, and 689 structures they've taken down. So that's they've gone on quite a tear with ripping down these buildings and homes and other Palestinian structures.
It's really crazy, Will, that Israel gets away with this just by saying they didn't have building permits. You would think that if you were going to make somebody homeless, you would have to have a better excuse or be able to, provide compensation. Like maybe they raise this Bedouin village, but then they offer, the Bedouins, a nice like chunk of land with a couple of houses on it or something like that. Like find
Right.
like an eminent domain thing that you would have in the U.S. I mean, they could steal your property, but at least they have to pay you for it. Whereas this is just another example of Israel just taking what they want from these people. And this has, been just the constant thing in the West Bank. And I'm sure for the Palestinians, it's just frustratingly dehumanizing, right? Like knowing that like you don't have security, that your home or that your village just can't be destroyed by the occupying power at any time has to be pretty terrifying. And Israel has also done this as retribution, right? So let's say there's a couple generations of people living in a house. If somebody has finally had enough and some kid takes a knife up to a soldier or tries to hit a soldier with their car or is even accused of it, the Israelis will come
Right.
with a bulldozer and take the house from the rest of the family, even if they had nothing to do with it, no ties or anything like that, just happened to be related to the guy who, again, finally had enough and snapped and tried to commit an act of violence against the occupying power. They'll just go and bulldoze the house for that reason too. So, this is tragic and a shame to what happened to these Bedouins, but bulldozing somebody's house and retribution like that is a war crime, and yet the Israelis continue to do it and get away with it.
Yeah, yeah. This is just merely one form of collective punishment that's done in the occupied territories. The Israelis have several different ways of sort of inflicting pain on the entire, population, the entire community. And the U.S., our government that steals money and acts in our name, endorses all of this effectively. The settlements and the demolitions and all of that. We give the Israelis billions of dollars in aid every single year for nothing in return at all. And even though I'd like to see that arrangement end completely, I think we should not be giving a penny of American tax dollars to the, Israel so they can, turn around and hand it to our and their own arms dealers and that kind of whole racket. But if we're going to give them money, we could at least condition it on, a variety of things, like just basic respect for the rights of Palestinians. But we have no interest in doing that. Certainly not under Donald Trump, and I don't expect we would under Joe Biden either.
Yeah, Joe Biden loves Israel. All right. Will, before we wrap up today, there's a couple of stories that I just wanted to touch on for a second. And they're mostly updates and extensions of the episode that we did, I think, earlier this week, right? Where we spent a lot of time talking about China and the
Yeah.
aggressive U.S. policy towards China. So this one, U.S. drone sale to Taiwan crosses key hurdle, nears approval. So I believe the State Department has now informed Congress that they plan to sell drones to Taiwan. It's a $600 million deal for four drones. They're the MQ-9 Sea Guardian drones. And I believe part of what they're supposed to be able to do is like submarine detection and stuff like that. It's possible that these drones can carry arms, but it's not necessarily sure that if the variant the U.S. Will sell, the Taiwanese will actually be able to carry arms if we'll give them, whatever kinds of different attachments and stuff on their Sea Guardians that will carry arms. But nonetheless, this will be a sale of drones to Taiwan that, of course, China is opposed to and is already yelling about it and saying that the U.S. really shouldn't do this. Another note here is I think this is a part of the Trump policy to make drone sales to countries easier. Before, I think it was really something we only sold to like secure NATO allies and stuff like that. And now it's going to Taiwan. I also hear that the Trump administration is planning a huge drone sale to the UAE, but I don't have many details on that right now. Will, do you have anything on this drone story?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think, not to toot our own horn too much. I think we've done a great job at just like updating and covering all the various, like, the Trump administration has really, like, if people go back and listen to that recent episode where we, covered all the China stories, they've really embarked on this massive campaign of hostilities. And part of that is like, selling a massive arsenal of weapons to Taiwan. Because the Taiwanese, obviously, the Chinese consider them like part of China proper. They consider them like a province in rebellion, and there's all this tension and all this dispute between the Chinese and Taiwan. And the U.S. has fully taken Taiwan. I don't know about fully. I think there's a couple things we could still do to back them. But the Trump administration has really escalated like the U.S. backing for Taipei there. And I'm looking at right now actually the announcement for this drone sale. The Defense Security Cooperation Agency announces these things. And I'm looking, I don't see any munitions with it. I don't think they are selling weapon. Like it may be capable of being armed, but I don't believe they are selling munitions. There's kind of a lot of text here, though. I might be missing
Yeah,
it.
I didn't see them selling munitions in the actual sale. But Taiwan already has U.S. munitions, so I wasn't
Right,
sure if there was anything that would be capable to stick on the underside of this drone or not. It
right,
doesn't sound like it's necessarily at least the main purpose of selling the drones. It seems more surveillance.
right.
But that doesn't mean that it's only going to be able to function that way.
Oh yeah, actually, I see it right here. For weapons ready MQ-9B. So weapons ready, I think suggests that like they are capable of being armed for sure.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, so that's interesting. But yeah,
Um,
that's about all I had on the drone sale.
all right, and then the last story I have here is something that me and Will, I believe, alluded to a little bit on Sunday's show, but the India, U.S., Japan, and Australia kick off large naval drills, largest joint naval exercises in over a decade, uh, and it's again as a show of force to China. So these are annual war games that I guess get held, but this year they're ramped up. I think this year they included more what they call digital and cyber warfare exercises. I'm not sure if that's just a COVID thing or if it's just the evolving warfare towards China and the way the U.S. looks at warfare towards China. I know I saw that the USS John McCain was involved here, which of course at one point ran into a civilian ship sailing around in some of these exercises, and so this can cause problems within the region as far as there's a lot of civilian ships that operate here, and when the U.S. carries out these big exercises, in the past U.S. ships have ran into civilian ships, fishing ships, oil cargo, stuff like that. So those kind of accidents happen, and it's a show of force to China, which I'm sure China isn't too happy about, and will look, and it will encourage them to invest in their military and anti-ship missiles and stuff like that. and increase tensions with China even more. So, not a whole lot on this story, but I thought it was definitely worth noting, especially all the coverage we gave to China on Monday. Will, anything on this?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think this is an important thing to watch. These four countries, like this, they have a security alliance known as the Quad, and it is meant to be. The U.S. has explicitly stated that it's meant to be like a regional bulwark against the Chinese in like the Asia Pacific region. And they've even talked about expanding it to other regional states. But as of now, it's just these four countries. But there was actually like we covered the Quad in detail on previous episode. And as I mentioned then, like there was a period for a couple of years where this thing seemed to have fallen apart, and like the alliance wasn't really doing too good. But they've really recently, like as of late, they've really revived this with like the Indians. They're having a territorial dispute with the Chinese over their Himalayan border, stuff like that. And so it really does seem like the Trump administration's taking that opportunity to start pushing this Quad alliance again. And yeah, here they are doing this big show of force military exercise, with eyes on China. So that's something to keep an eye on.
All right. Well, just before we wrap here, remind everybody to check out the show on YouTube at Conflicts of Interest. Will Porter is on Twitter at the Will Porter. I'm at Kyle Anslone _. You find the show on Facebook, Conflicts of Interest, Twitter at con_interest, and then patreon.com/conflicts of interest. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks, Cal. Bye, everybody.